All right, so today we're talking about Bernie Sanders, and let me just say this. I don't know if Bernie's going to win the Democratic nomination. He probably won't. I think Hillary's probably got it sewed up. I do think Bernie will win New Hampshire. That's not controversial. I think it's pretty accepted wisdom at this point that he's going to run away with New Hampshire. He basically tied Hillary in Iowa, but this is the interesting thing about Iowa, and this is what I really want to talk about, is that in Iowa, Bernie Sanders, according to NPR, got 90%, 90% of the vote of anybody under 26. So the youth vote went 90% to Bernie. And I think this is something worth thinking about, right? I think very few young people even showed up for the Republican caucuses in Iowa. Very few young people vote Republican. So young people vote Democratic. And of those, 90%, at least in Iowa, voted for Bernie. And I think this is overwhelmingly the case across the United States, whereas there was a time 8 years ago where there was this huge movement of young people around Ron Paul. Bernie is much bigger among young people, much bigger around among young people than Ron Paul is. I just thought of the fact, both Ron Paul and Bernie are really old. It's kind of weird. You wouldn't expect that of young people to be attracted to such old candidates as Bernie and Ron Paul are. So what's going on? Why is it that so many young people, college students, I would argue probably high school students, young professionals, are so attracted to the Bernie Sanders message? This is men, women, a lot of women, young women under the age of 26, voted for Bernie over Hillary, in spite of the fact that obviously Hillary is a woman. And the conventional wisdom is that women vote for women. And no, young women in Iowa voted overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders. He's going to win New Hampshire. And then the question is, can he win the South? And the main reason articulated for why Bernie Sanders can't win Nevada and can't win the South is that he has very little appeal among Hispanics and among black voters. He has a huge appeal among young white voters and among middle-class white voters generally. So, interesting. I mean, these are all kind of interesting cross-sections. A lot of people say, well, he wants to give free stuff to people. Well, if it was just about free stuff to people, then why wouldn't Hispanics and blacks and many others rally to the cause? Why isn't Bernie Sanders running away with this? If it was just about free stuff, right? I think it's deeper than free stuff. And then what I want to do is to just give you a sense of what I want to do today. I want to go over Bernie Sanders' speech, particularly his speech on democratic socialism, what he means by democratic socialism. I think it's a fascinating speech. I think it's very revealing in terms of what he's about and what makes him appealing. I think it's revealing in terms of how he capitalizes on what young people have been taught in school over the last 50 years, but really, in particular over the last 20 or 30 years, and that explains part of his appeal. But it's a really, really interesting speech. Generally, I like to read these speeches of people who I generally despise, and what you discover when you read them is there's a lot of interesting stuff there, and just you can learn from how they structure their speeches, and you can learn from the kind of issues, the kind of triggers that they use to ignite support for themselves. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Bernie Sanders presents himself and is a form of idealist. He's consistent. He presents a vision of the world, and it's not a vision of the world that is as radical as Chavez or as radical as Lenin. He's very careful to present it in realistic terms. So when Bernie Sanders points to a country as an example of what he wants, he points to Sweden, he points to Finland or Denmark, he even points to France and Germany. He doesn't have to point very far. He points when he's looking for inspiration. He doesn't take it from Karl Marx, not in his speeches. He doesn't take it from socialist thinkers of the past. He takes it from an American icon, a founding father for the left. He takes it from FDR. So he has this kind of realistic idealism, an idealism that is grounded in a certain perspective that's real, that people can look and say, hey, that's pretty good. I want to be Sweden. I don't think being Sweden is that bad. And hey, he's quoting FDR. FDR is not some radical nut. FDR was another idealist. So he is an idealist with some reality to it. It's not completely floating. He's presenting real examples. He's trying to be. He's radical and yet not radical. He's radical in the sense that he's undercutting everything that is America. But he's not radical in the sense that he's saying, look, all I want us to be is like Europe. All I want us to be is like the best in Europe. And we might respond negatively to the example of Sweden, but for most people, you visit Sweden, people are happy, people are relatively well off, and by the parameters that most people on the left play by, Sweden is this semi-heaven. So he is idealistic, and then he's in that sense, and then he's consistent. He consistently applies these ideas, and he doesn't deviate. So he hates Wall Street, so he has a bunch of things to attack Wall Street. He's not like Hillary or like the Republicans that hedge everything, that contradict themselves, that it seem like they talk a good talk, but then you look at their voting record, it's inconsistent. Here is a guy like Ron Paul, whose voting record is to a large extent consistent with what he says. People admire people who have integrity, even if it's integrity to bad ideas. So here's an idealist, to some extent a rebel, not a complete hippie rebel in the sense of, again, wanting to abandon all material things and to go and follow the Grateful Dead and smoke weed. Although you could imagine Bernie Sanders following the Grateful Dead and smoking weed. But no, a rebel in a sense that he's not part of the establishment. He hasn't voted for all the things everybody else has voted for. He doesn't get corporate money. That's a big part of it. A big part of it is not getting corporate money. It's not being part of the corporate machine. He makes a huge deal out of this. And he leverages a certain fear that exists in America today. He leverages a certain, real existential angst that people have today about corporations, about big business, and he connects it to big government, right? He connects big business to big government, just like Donald Trump does, just like many of the candidates out there, and just like kind of the popular culture does. They connect big business, big government together. Cronyism, and they call it, of course, crony capitalism, because they want to make cronyism a feature of capitalism. Whereas, as I've said many times on this show before, cronyism is a feature of statism. Cronyism is what you'll get if Bernie Sanders wins. Cronyism is what you'll get if Hillary wins. Cronyism is what you get if almost every Republican wins. Cronyism is a feature of big government, not the other way around. But what Bernie's telling you is the reason government is ineffective, the reason government is not providing us with what we really want, the reason government is out of touch and out of control and detached from the people is because of capitalism, because of cronyism. Cronyism is the cause of bad government. And therefore, vote for him because he doesn't get money from corporations. He's the anti-cronyism candidate. Bigger government, you will reduce cronyism, which is nuts and crazy and ridiculous and stupid and goes against reality. But people buy it. Because partially, I will argue, and one of the reasons I think Sanders is so popular among the young is there's no alternative narrative. There's nobody telling an alternative story. There's nobody actually articulating a pro-individualism, pro-free market, limited government, principled, idealistic, rebellious argument. We should be the rebels. We should be the rebels. The limited government side should be the rebels. And when Ron Paul did it, he wasn't the limited government. He sounded a lot like Bernie Sanders. He blamed the Fed not as a government institution, but as a big bank. And he hated Wall Street, just like Bernie does. If you listen to how Bernie talks about Wall Street, and if you listen to how Ron Paul talked about Wall Street, they echo one another. Because Ron Paul was not a true limited government pro-capitalist candidate. He was a populist, anti-Wall Street, anti-big business candidate. And Bernie Sanders is capturing basically the Ron Paul plus the leftist ideologues on the left among young people. So he's capturing both the left and the Ron Paul kind of segment of the population. And that's what makes him so popular. And it's his idealism, his consistency, his rebellion, the right. And the right here I mean by the individualistic, limited government, pro-individual rights segment is that kind of candidate who is a true rebel, who is truly idealistic and is consistent. Right? The closest, I guess, you have right now is a Donald Trump, but he's not idealistic, he's not consistent, he doesn't believe in anything. So he's a rebel, but that's it. He's an empty rebel. The alternative is a Ted Cruz, who in some ways is a rebel, in some way is consistent around limited government, except when it comes to the role of religion. People are not going to follow, not yet anyway, the day will come, but not yet, a rebel who is religious. So the right has nobody. The right has nobody who has these kind of characteristics. And this is what young people want. They want ideals. They want to believe in something. Now, these particular young people, the particular young people that we have today, trained and raised on a constant, unstopping flow of altruism. And a combination of altruism and, as the caller just mentioned, a real sense of existential angst, a real challenge, because the jobs are not there if you're young. The economy is not doing well. There are real issues and problems. And they are seeing, the rich get, or some rich get a lot richer. And yet their families and their own fortunes look relatively bleak. And they've been told a particular narrative, a particular story about how that came about, a particular narrative, a particular story that Bernie Sanders repeats over and over and over again. But this is a narrative and a story that the left has been repeating over and over and over again for the last 10, 15 years. And young people, this is all they've heard. This is the only interpretation of reality and interpretation of history that they know. And now Bernie Sanders is echoing it back to them. And they're saying, finally, a candidate who speaks the language that we've been raised on. The language of exploitation, the language of zero-sum game, the language of inequality. Inequality language is dominant here. And this is the key to understanding Bernie Sanders. He is reflecting back to these young people the whole narrative that they've heard from Obama, that they've heard from Paul Krugman, that they've heard from their teachers at the universities, all of their teachers at universities, almost all of them, that they've learned in high school, the narrative, the historical narrative, the contemporary narrative, the economic narrative. Bernie Sanders is reflecting back to them all of that. He's the first politician much more so than even Obama, actually articulate the historical, philosophical case for the United States becoming Europe. I really do want to go over Bernie Sanders' speech because I think it's very revealing and really, really interesting, both in terms of the narrative that the left has adopted, who their heroes are, how they articulate the case, and then what they're actually proposing. Because it's important to understand what they're actually proposing. Theirs is a moderate form of socialism. It's statism. It's radical statism, but it's not quite socialism in the technical sense. And you know, we're going to talk about that. But to understand the appeal in young people, we have to understand what Bernie is actually saying. All right. We're going to be right back to actually go over the talk, one of his talks, right after these messages. So one of the important things to understand about Bernie Sanders and the left generally is that they have a particular story about American history. And really the way they see American history, everything before FDR is miserable and pathetic. They never talk about the Founding Fathers, the founding documents. Those are uninteresting. Really, the founding father of America for the left is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR really establishes America as the left sees it. Indeed, there's a new book out about economic growth by a well-known economist. And the argument there is that economic growth in America really only begun in a serious way and in a way that benefited everybody and created the middle class in 1940. That is as a consequence of the New Deal policies of FDR. And this is standard rhetoric on the left. And it is bizarre. It is nuts if you understand actual economic history and you understand economics. But this is actually what they hold and what they advocate on a regular and systemic basis. So when Bernie Sanders is giving a speech, and the speech I'm using of Bernie's is the speech that he gave last year, where he really discusses what he means by democratic, what he calls democratic socialism. And you know, this is a speech where he goes through what he really believes, and he covers most of the agenda items. So it's a very worthwhile speech to read if you want to understand Bernie. He starts out immediately at the beginning of the speech with, it's 1937, the Great Depression is on, millions of people out of work, millions of people are starving or don't have the necessities of life, and in came FDR and saved the day. He implemented a series of programs, to quote Bernie, that put millions of people back to work, took them out of poverty, and restored their faith in government. He makes a big deal about faith in government, right? Because they need faith in government. You got to believe in something. You can't believe in God, right? These are atheists. You can't believe in yourself. That would be evil individualism. So what's left is a belief in government. So, according to Bernie, FDR really is where it's all started. And FDR is the hero, the founding hero of America. It's unbelievable, right? They completely ignore history. They completely ignore the founding of America. They ignore the founding fathers never make it into the speech, but FDR repeatedly. And what is his great achievement? His great achievement is Social Security. His great achievement is the minimum wage. His great achievement is the end of child labor. His great achievement is the 40-hour work week, collective bargaining, strong banking regulations, deposit insurance, job programs that put millions of people to work. All of these things, which Bernie Sanders says at the time were called socialism, and yet today they are the core, the fabric, the foundation of America, the foundation of the middle class. And that's what he's selling. Saying, look, FDR passed all these programs. They worked. People got jobs. People became rich. The middle class was created. And everybody depends on these programs. Nobody's against these programs. Nobody challenges these programs. These programs are here to stay. And they were called socialist once upon a time. So what's the big deal about my programs? They're just using the same label of socialism. But this is, all this stuff is good stuff. Who challenges that? And then the second founding father of the left is Johnson, President Johnson. And he passed Medicare and Medicaid. And look, everybody loves those. I mean, the Republicans want to save those. Nobody argues against Medicare and Medicaid. And they were called socialist programs. Now, note that not a single Republican challenges any of that. Who challenges the minimum wage? On principle. Or Social Security? On principle. Or 40-hour work week? On principle. Or collective bargaining? On principle. Or banking regulations? On principle. Or deposit insurance or job programs? Nobody challenges this. There's no ideologue of the right. There is no ideologue of the right. They're all little versions of Bernie Sanders. They're all little versions of social democracy. Just some of them believe in it less consistently, and some of it believe in it more consistently. And Bernie Sanders is the most consistent of all of them, and therefore he is loved by the young. Because he is the only one. You know, he is Donald Trump and Kasich and Jeb Bush and all of these guys and Hillary Clinton, just more consistent. All of them believe in Medicare and Medicaid. All of them believe in the minimum wage. They might not want to raise it right now, but they all believe in some of this. And it's not that they're pragmatists. It's that they're all fundamentally collectivists, that they're all fundamentally altruists. And therefore they have to be, in practice, in application, they have to be some version of social democrat. And there's nobody out there, no consistent, principled opposition to any of this. I mean, Bernie Sanders wants single-payer health care. So does Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not the opposite of Bernie Sanders. Donald Trump is just another version of Bernie Sanders. A more obnoxious version of Bernie Sanders. All right, so the historical narrative is this. Country got into deep, deep trouble because of capitalism, because of income inequality. Call it the Great Depression. And to get us out of the Great Depression, we adopted all these programs that were called socialist at the time. But the fact is, they are what created modern America. They are what created the middle class. They are what we all benefit from today. So, this is what's good about America. All these programs, all these government interventions. That's what made America great. That's what's good about America. And all I want to do, Bernie Sanders, is expand these programs, broaden these programs, because they don't work anymore. Because of deregulation and because of tax cuts, they don't work anymore. So we need to expand them. We need to broaden them. We need to resurrect FDR. We need to resurrect Lyndon Johnson. And I'm your guy, Bernie Sanders. And remember that these kids that he's appealing to, studied history in our high schools and our universities, in history classes that make FDR out to be the greatest president in American history. Never challenged the establishment of the welfare state by LBJ. Think that was his great, great, great achievement. And in spite of all the other ills that LBJ brought about, the fact that he brought about Medicare and Medicaid and the welfare state makes him one of the great presidents. So Bernie Sanders plays into the story. Okay, here's the story again. Right? Here's the story again. FDR and Johnson saved America from capitalism's ills. But since the 1970s, the Republicans and the establishment Democrats have been undoing their programs. And because of that, tens of millions of American families continue to lack the basic necessities of life. This is quoting Bernie. While millions more struggle every day to provide a minimum standard of living for their families. Why? Because of all the undoing that's happened. The reality is, he says, that for the last 40 years, the middle class, the great middle class of this country, has been in decline, and faith in our political system is now extremely low. Again, he makes a big deal over faith in our political system. The rich get much richer. Almost everyone else gets poorer. Super PACs funded by billionaires buy elections. This is the inequality narrative that's being told over and over and over again, over and over and over again, by everybody on the left, by every intellectual on the left. And Bernie Sanders is cashing in. Bernie Sanders is cashing in on the quality of history education in our high schools and our colleges, on the inequality narrative that's being told over and over again. He's cashing in on the inequality debate. Again, this is why you should buy my book with Don Watkins, Equal is Unfair, because you'll get the counter to this inequality argument. And here he says that, look, America is the wealthiest nation in history. Few Americans know that because all of the wealth is at the top. Now, that's complete BS, complete nonsense. The whole idea of stagnation over the last 40 years is nonsense. I mean, almost all Americans today have a supercomputer in their pocket. Just that very fact has raised their standard of living dramatically. And yet, that's not captured in the inequality numbers. So you don't capture that in income numbers or wealth numbers or any of these other numbers. So the perception is, oh no, Americans are just as have the same income and the same wealth as they did 40 years ago. And yet we have much better stuff. But how do you capture that? Where's that captured? Isn't captured. Now listen to this. This is interesting. How does Bernie explain the fact that the rich are getting richer? And this is really important because this is what creates real angst among people. He says, in fact, over the last 30 years, there's been a massive transfer of wealth, trillions of wealth, going from the middle class to the top 1%. So it's a transfer of wealth. The top 1% haven't created anything. They haven't made anything. They haven't built anything. They don't deserve anything. Top 1% have basically taken the wealth from everybody else. There's been a redistribution of the pie. Now note what he capitalizes on here. He capitalizes on the ignorance of Americans. The ignorance of Americans that assumes that economics is a zero-sum game. Though what we live in today is not a growing pie, but a pie that's just being redistributed. He buys into, or he's reinforcing the ignorance that suggests that the rich get rich by stealing, by taking, by redistributing, rather than by making, by building, by creating. Now that is a powerful, powerful thing. Because if the rich are really, they're redistributing, they are crooks, then that's really, really bad. Now, how are they taking? They're not taking by literally taking out a gun and stealing your money. They're taking by having disproportionate influence in politics and rigging the game. And he talks about rigging the game over and over and over again. Again, really reinforcing this message. They rigged the system so that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, so that money flows not through welfare from the rich to the poor, but from the poor and the middle class to the rich. Because they have captured the political system. And political system, through regulations and through bailouts and through controls, moves money from the rich and the middle class from the poor and the middle class to the rich. And it's always interesting because the bailouts they always complain about are the bank bailouts. They never complain about the auto bailouts, right? They don't complain about the bailouts that they like. They complain about the bailouts they don't like, that are easy to present to people that they don't understand, which means the bank bailouts, because everybody inherently hates bankers. All right, we've talked about that in the previous show. Okay, but challenge altruism, challenge mysticism. So on the right, they would have a Ted Cruz candidate would have to challenge mysticism. On the left, a candidate would have to challenge altruism. And we live in a culture that's not willing to challenge either one of those. Not yet. Not yet. It's going to take a while. This is why I believe the battle we're in is a multi-decades battle. The tsunami will happen, but it will happen slowly over many decades, and we will gradually get there. So maybe the tsunami is a bad analogy, like most analogies are. So, that it's frustrating, right? But it just takes time. And there's no way around the fact that it takes time, because what we're asking people is to rethink 2,000 years of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Yeah, we're challenging Christianity. We're challenging Judaism. That ain't going to happen quickly. Indeed, for most people in the world out there, the reason is not in control. For most people in the world out there, they are driven by their emotion. We're seeing a whole generation of whim worshippers. I think these young people are all whim worshippers, not all. Most of them are whim worshippers, and that's again what attracts them to Bernie, is that he appeals to their emotion. He appeals to everything that they've been taught. It's easy. It's intuitive. It doesn't require thinking. Bernie doesn't require thinking. Everything he says, their professors have told them already. Their high school teachers taught them already. And Obama for 8 years has been preaching. So it's just reinforcing everything they believe in. And again, nobody is offering them an alternative. And that's the tragedy. Let's go back to Bernie's. What Bernie is latching onto here is a real existential angst that exists. The economy in America is not doing well. Many people are really suffering. There really is an issue of inequality, in the sense that it's not an issue of inequality, but in a sense that if you're poor or lower middle class, life is very, very rough for you. If you're in the upper 1%, life is pretty good. And most people, by definition, in the 99%. And for most people, life is not that easy, particularly if you're in the bottom 80%. Our economy does not allow for as much mobility as it used to. There are real challenges. There's no economic growth. Economic growth is very low. And even though unemployment numbers are at the lowest they've been in a long, long time, the percentage of the people in the population actually working is still very low. So there are a lot of people who are not looking for work and who are not working. Also, the number of people with part-time jobs is very high. So there's real angst. There's real angst. And Bernie is offering a solution. Bernie's offering a solution. There's angst around health insurance, about co-payments, about deductibles. There's angst about how many people are in poverty. There's angst about youth unemployment. There's angst about, politics and how much influence money has in politics, legitimate angst of cronyism. And then, of course, Bernie brings in the idea, which is quite prevalent among the left and is dominant in our universities, that this country is about freedom. And yet, how can you be free if you're hungry? How can you be free if you don't have economic security? This is, again, harking back to FDR. In his State of the Union, 1944, we established what he called the Second Bill of Rights. Again, I go back to the idea, which I think is important, that for the left, FDR is the founding father. FDR is where it all begins. So that there is no such thing. There is no such thing as freedom unless you have economic security. Now, this is equivocation on the term freedom, because freedom means free of coercion. It means the lack of coercion, the lack of force, the lack of compulsion. Economic security necessitates forcing people. It necessitates compulsion. It necessitates coercion. So real freedom cannot include economic security. You are free if you're hungry and nobody's coercing you. Marx and the left and FDR have created this myth around economic security. You cannot be free without it. And of course, that's a contradiction. It's a package deal, and it has no basis in reality. Real freedom means freedom from coercion. That's it. It means the ability to act based on one's own judgment, free of the coercive government, free of coercion from one neighbor, free of coercion. And of course, once you accept economic security as necessary for freedom, you have to accept, as Bernie Sanders says, quoting from Roosevelt, note the link, to a decent job at a decent pay, the right to adequate food, clothing, time off from work, the right for every business, large and small, to function in an atmosphere free from unfair competition. What is unfair competition, I know? And domination by monopolies, the right of all Americans to have a decent home and a decent health care. Right? So it turns all these things that have to be produced into rights. You cannot have a right to somebody else's stuff. You cannot have a right to stuff that needs to be produced. The only right you have is to be free from coercion. Not according to the left. Not according to FDR. Not according to Bernie Sanders. So he says people are not truly free when they are unable to feed their families. But it's okay to enslave other people to feed their families. To feed the families of those who haven't, right? So it's okay to violate somebody people's rights because you supposedly are not free. All right, so we're back. We're talking about Bernie Sanders. Why do young people like Bernie Sanders? Well, because they're idealistic and because they want consistency. They want politicians they can believe in. And he's consistent, and he's idealistic, and he's a rebel. He's going against the establishment, and young people always like anti-establishment types. But more fundamentally, Bernie Sanders is just cashing in. He's cashing in on the altruism these kids have been taught since they were little. The idea that it's okay to sacrifice some people for others. In this case, let's just sacrifice millionaires and billionaires. I mean, they've got plenty to sacrifice. That should be easy to sacrifice. Well, they're cashing in on history. That is, on the lack of any knowledge of history among young people today. They don't have a clue. The history they were taught is complete nonsense. The history they were taught is from the school from which Bernie Sanders comes from. They were taught and have been taught leftist history, a leftist interpretation of the history of the United States. And they've learned a lesson from that. They've learned from that the left is successful, that FDR won, that Johnson's programs were good. Now, nobody actually says, except me, Ayn Rand, of course, said this, that all the problems that exist in America today, that all the difficulties that the middle class and the poor are experiencing today in America are the consequences of the programs passed by FDR and Truman. It's indeed Bernie Sanders' history upside down. All those programs that have passed are the cause of the financial crisis. Because without Too Big to Fail, which is a consequence of deposit insurance, there would be no financial crisis. Without Social Security and Medicare, there'd be all that capital available in private hands to build companies, to create jobs, increase the wealth of the middle class, to increase productivity. It is Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and the minimum wage and all these things that have destroyed America. But nobody knows that. So he's capitalizing on historical and then, of course, on economic ignorance. People don't know where wealth comes from. People don't know wealth needs to be created. They think wealth is just redistributed. People were born into the late 20th century, early 21st century, without knowing that the natural condition of human beings is poverty, and that to rise up from poverty is an achievement that requires massive effort engaged by particular individuals using their reason to solve problems. They don't know any of this. They have no clue. So altruism is being cashed in. History, the lack of knowledge of history is being cashed in. Lack of knowledge of economics is being cashed in. And then the whole inequality debate he's cashing in on. They've heard over and over and over again about the inequality debate, and he's just playing that like a violin. All the talking points of the inequality guys he has got, and he uses them, and he uses them, and he uses them. And he appeals to emotion, just like any of these guys state, as they appeal to emotion. They appeal to, and this is altruism, right? The suffering people over here and the millionaires and billionaires over there. We'll just take a little bit from the millionaires and billionaires and give to the people over there who are suffering. How can anybody be against that if you're a good altruist? If you're a good Christian? If you were raised on the Sermon of the Mount, how can you be against this? Well, nobody can. And then finally, so we got idealistic and consistent and rebellious. We've got his cashing in on everything these kids are being taught. And then finally, he has no challenge. Nobody challenges him. He's the most consistent of all the presidential candidates, including the Republicans. Not a single one of them challenges. Oh, they say, universal health care, that'd be too expensive. Which is exactly what they said about Medicare and Medicaid and what they said about Social Security, right? And they're still around. Free tuition, that'll be too expensive. No, these are immoral programs that are going to destroy America. They're going to destroy the very essence of what America is about. They're immoral. Who's going to say that? Nobody. And that's why we are where we are today. That's why we are where we are today, because nobody will say that. There's no challenge to Bernie. All right, we got a couple of other calls. Let's see. Hi,
Jonathan.
Hey, Jonathan. How are things?
Good. I enjoyed your discussion about Bernie Sanders, and you've always talked about, people always ask you, what can you do to change the culture? You've always stressed how it starts with education. And as I listen to you, it almost, Bernie's got the entire Board of Education, America Board of Education, Department of Education behind him. And they're all working for him in that sense.
Absolutely.
Philosophically. And one of the most important things I think that ARI does is the free books for teachers programs, because it does start with the education and professors and intellectuals. And just think, remember that woman who all the Black Lives protesters said that she needed some muscle to get a journalist out of there? I mean, it's the professors who are behind the Black Lives Matter and Occupy and Bernie Sanders. So it does all start on the campus. And, why are they into Bernie? I feel like the youth has learned it from their professors. So anything we can do to get the right ideas on these college campuses, whether it's the Undercurrent, Strive, ARI Books to Teachers, that's the only way I think the culture is going to change.
Yes, and we got to articulate the ideas, and we got to articulate, one of the things that I would say to objectivists or people who agree with us on ideas is don't emphasize the politics. This debate is not about politics. This debate is about fundamental issues like altruism and like subjectivism versus objectivity and the role of reason. Those are the fundamental ideas, and we've got to be philosophical. And I see so many debates on everywhere about politics this, politics that, Ted Cruz versus this or that guy. None of it matters. None of it matters if the professors keep teaching the garbage that they keep teaching. At the end of the day, we will lose, even if we win short term. What we need to focus on is on the philosophical debate, on the philosophical issues, on the philosophical education of young people. And that's the only alternative. It's the only way we'll get an alternative. Great, Jonathan. Thanks. And thanks for all the work you do to promote these ideas everywhere you go. Bernie Sanders, loved by young people. Why? Because he actually comes across as believing in what he says. He actually takes the ideas these kids have studied, learned since they were in pre-kindergarten, and he applies them consistently to the political reality in which they live. He echoes back to them everything their professors and their teachers have taught them for 20 plus years, assuming they're in their 20s. He relates to them a American history that they can understand, an American history that starts with FDR, not with the Founding Fathers, but with FDR, because nobody teaches the importance of the Founding Fathers anymore. Indeed, the whole 19th century is taught as an evil century, a century of exploitation, a century of genocide of the American Indian, just a century of awful, awful things, none of the virtues, a century of slavery. And a lot of that stuff is true. A lot of that stuff is problematic. But none of the positives of the 19th century are taught. None of the good stuff is taught. And the lesson learned from the 19th century is all wrong. It's an anti-capitalist lesson. So Bernie Sanders is just cashing in on everything, on our culture, on our educational system, on our professors, on Paul Krugman and Piketty's narrative about inequality. I mean, the only good news, I would say right now, is that Bernie Sanders is not winning in a landslide. He should be. He should be. If I had all the professors in the United States behind me, I would win in a landslide. The only thing preventing Bernie Sanders from winning in a landslide is the American sense of life. Is the American sense of life. And it's in decline. So maybe Bernie won't win this time, but Bernie's going to win long term. A Bernie-like candidate is going to win. I mean, we already got Obama, who is very Bernie-like, but it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. And we might have a backlash to the right now. We might get a Rubio or somebody elected. Or Hillary might win over Bernie because I think some people on the left are more interested in getting free stuff than they are in the ideology of the left. But they want the free stuff to be realistic, and they want it to be targeted at them. And that's what Hillary gives them. Hillary gives free stuff to the people who will vote for her for the sake of free stuff. You see, I don't think young people are voting for Sanders because they want free stuff. But unfortunately, I think we've created a culture in which many people who vote in the Democratic Party do want free stuff. They're playing the cronyism game. They're cronies, just like the businessmen who are cronies. And they want free stuff. And if they're realistic about getting that free stuff, they're voting for Hillary. So it's the American sense of life and a certain sense of pragmatism which is going to save us from Bernie Sanders. All right. I want to talk about this show on Showtime called Billion. First of all, it's well done. It's well produced. I'd say it's not quite as well produced and well done as what was that show I mentioned earlier, Mr. Robot. It's not as clever. It's not as sharp. It's not as original, but it's well done. Acting is very good. But this is what it reveals. So you've got a district attorney who is modeled after Giuliani and Spitzer, two of the nastiest characters ever. I hate Giuliani and Spitzer for what they did to the financial industry and how they acted as district attorneys. Modeled after them, the district attorney ambition is to be governor, just like Giuliani and Spitzer, and he's a scumbag. He likes to be tied up and beaten up. He likes pain. He likes worse than that. He likes to be peed on. So he's a sexual deviant, at least in my book. I consider all that sexual deviancy. And And he's a power luster. He doesn't believe in anything. He's not Bernie Sanders. He's not an idealist. He wants to crush these people. He's a little fascist. He wants people to follow the law for the sake of following the law. At some point he says, I do this for the public good, and his wife says, you do it for your own good, and sometimes that overlaps with the public good. He's in it for his own power lust. Now, all of that is great. Wow, we're finally seeing a politician, a district attorney who really is all about power and all about, ugliness. And then you've got a billionaire. You've got the billionaire where it's taken for granted he's made his money by cheating. That's given. He's an insider trader. They all are insider trader. There's no way to make money in hedge funds without being an insider trader. So they're all insider traders. But he's kind of a nice guy. And he helps people. And he actually takes over some companies and makes them better. And he treats people with inherited wealth really, really badly. So you sympathize with that. Oh, he's a self-made guy, and those guys are inherited wealth. But the way he's self-made there's a huge implication. And we'll see as the series evolves, I think there'll be proof of this, that he's basically lied and stolen, the equivalent of. And this is how they portray insider trading. We could do a whole show on insider trading, but let's assume it's bad, which they assume in the show. Right? So here you go. You've got a scumbag of a district attorney and a kind of nice billionaire that everybody can feel good about, but who's a crook, who's a cheat. In other words, the series assumption is they're no good guys in the whole movie. They're no good guys. Maybe the wife of the district attorney, but she's the one doing the peeing. So one wonders, and she manipulates people. She's a psychologist, and she's kind of good. But at the end of the day, this is the most cynical show you'll ever see. They're all kind of bad guys. They're all manipulators. They're all the elite. We, the middle class and the poor, these are the guys who trample on us, both in government and in private industry. Everybody's after you. Everybody's destroying you. This is the ruling class. And the ruling class is what's destroying the country. And the ruling class are the millionaires and billionaires and typical politicians, except for Bernie Sanders, who calls them out on it. So the district attorney could be Hillary Clinton or any one of the Republican candidates, or Giuliani or Spitzer. Giuliani was a Republican, Spitzer was a Democrat, doesn't matter. And he's going after the billionaire, but in some dark, real way, they're all the same and they're all screwing all of us. In the chat, somebody mentioned Damian Lewis, who's the actor from Homeland. He's the billionaire, and he's very good. He's very good. And Giamatti, I think that's his name, is the prosecutor, who's very good. But this plays right into all of this. It's anti-capitalist, but in a subtle way, because it's anti-government as well. It's anti the so-called powers to be, and it equates economic power with political power. So I'm watching it, and it's entertaining, and it's educational in terms of the state of the culture. But beware, it is cynical. And beware, it is a portrayal of the leftist view of the world, of the leftist perspective, both on billionaires and on government. Both are corrupt, both are evil. In the end, government is more important. So I'm watching it. If you guys watch it, I'd be interested in your comments and what you think of it. But this is how revolutions start, by portraying the people at the top, no matter how they got there, no matter who they are, no matter whether they're productive or moochers and looters, they're all the same. They're all bad, and we the people are being screwed. All right.